Water Cooler! I'm Tristan Linville, joined by my co-host, Michael Callahan, and we are here to make manufacturing and technology cool again. We have this Water Cooler Talks podcast. We are on episode 9, Michael. How about that? Can you believe it?
I'm almost out of fingers, Tristan. What am I going to do when we get to episode 11? We may have to stop.
Fingers kind of transitions me into the joke of the day.
Let's hear it.
But we're going to talk about something else. My girlfriend, she broke up with me a long time ago when she found out I only had 9 toes. She was lactose intolerant.
What a perfect transition. That is awesome.
We didn't even put in that.
No, we didn't, but we should have because it was that good.
Yeah, Tristan, I love it. Well, what do we got? You tell us what we got for the day.
We got a special guest.
All right.
We're on the Lockheed train right now.
Are we?
I'm not gonna say anything until we show her up here.
All right.
Let's bring her in.
All right, bring her in. Here we go.
Woo! Lisa, what's going on?
Good morning.
Look, we only have one problem today. Tristan is the only one not representing the school of choice. Tristan, and you're the only one with a football game this weekend. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, I do have, I guess, my diplomas. Which way? This way. There we go. Go Knowles.
I don't know if we'd call those diplomas, but we'll go with it.
So, Lisa, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you guys?
Dandy.
Better now.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're about to have some fun.
Yeah. So, everybody, Lisa spent the last 15 years in aerospace and defense manufacturing at Lockheed Martin. Lisa is one of my mentors, taught me everything I know about MRP, ERP, so many stories that we probably already told here. She's been part of that. You guys just didn't know it. So here she is in the flesh.
I love it.
And now we're flipping the script. Now I look to Tristan to mentor me.
What a perfect world, right?
That's why they say never burn a bridge. You never know who you're going to need later.
You know, we're about to have some more fun talking about ERP/business system/ whatever technology you want to talk about today. So, Lisa, take us back. Let's talk about your time at Lockheed. Tristan mentioned AS400. I think it's called, was it Apex?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about talk to us about that? What is it? And what were some of the challenges around that?
Yep. So it's a system that I believe Lockheed Missiles and Fire Control on the Orlando couple site side adopted or really designed, created in the 80s. DOS based. So I always like to, whenever I describe it to someone who doesn't really understand, it's when you think of when you went to the library as a kid and the librarian was typing on a blue screen, or what Microsoft Word was before it was Microsoft Word. That's what it was. There was no cursor. You tabbed. You had to type in these, what felt like what's the word I'm thinking of? Not hieroglyphics, but these key terms to figure out. You had to just know what they were. There was no file to choose from, no word bank to choose from. It was very disjointed. Our quality note system was not part of it. Our engineering system was not part of it. There were background finance screens that everything had to tick and tie perfectly in order for you to be able to load requirements. Everything was extremely disjointed, but the hard thing for a company like Lockheed is that they were in it for 35 years. So there were some people who were there from the inception of it that could tell you every single thing about why everything is where it was at the time.
And they loved it, I bet.
And don't let Lisa fool you. She knew everything about that freaking system. Like, it was insane.
I grew to love it just because I was in it for 10 years and I needed to know how to do. I needed to know how to do everything. It was like I was a sponge. You know, your younger years, you have room in your brain still to learn things.
Well, and I used to be on a blue screen or a very old system. Some people call it a green screen. I call it a blue because mine was blue. But there were hotkeys, and it was hotkeys were awesome, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, easy navigation. However, there were lots of limitations. When you build a system in the 80s, things change. So talk a little bit about the transition from the AS400 to like the modern ERP of, the choosing there.
Yep. So when we were in the AS400 system, so it's kind of ironic because they hired me in 2009 to help them with the transition, right? So this is 2009. We didn't end up transitioning until 2019. Delay after delay, a lot of pushback. There were really three mentalities, and Tristan can probably attest to this. There were some of the mentalities of, I'm not going to do it. You can't make me.
Yeah.
There was the mentality, which is kind of the one that I dove into, was I have a lot of career left. I have to dive into it. I can't just retire today. I'm in my 20s still, 30s. And then there were the folks that were brand new that were like, I cannot believe you guys are still in this DOS-based system. So you had three completely, and I always describe it as like a bathtub curve. So you had the ones up here who were, 3 to 5 years on their way out. The ones, I call it at the drain, which is where I lived, is the folks that still had your whole 20 years left, but you did 15 years time already. So there was a lot of change management-y stuff that had to happen, but it had to be generationally different. Because like I said, the ones that had just joined were gung-ho, ready to go. We got smart and started hiring people with SAP experience, but they didn't have the tribal knowledge of the Lockheedism. So how did we merge those two together? And I think it took the people kind of at the drain to bring the SAP experienced people and the folks that were a couple years out from retirement to try to pull them together to kind of build that network. So they wanted to learn and they wanted to work with each other. So at the end of the day, it's kind of like the tagline is that we're in the business of bringing home warfighters. So we couldn't not transition. We had to keep up with the times. We combined, I think, 27 or 28 systems into one. So that's how many disjointed systems we had to pull into one ERP. And even then, it still feels we have room to grow and modernize because technology is changing. I mean, faster than we can blink, we're changing and growing, and we have to be able to keep up with the times.
Yeah, I have a question because that 28 to 1, like, to me, is just fascinating. And maybe to get this answer may be very difficult in a short time, but like, what were the benefits that y'all saw moving from 28 systems to one? Like, high level, what are some of the benefits?
I think there was more intuitiveness you could find answers quicker, I guess, in short term. And you didn't have to know what system to go to find this Q note, to find this purchase rec, to find this RMA, to find this shipper. You may not know exactly where to click, but you don't have to log into 8 different systems just to get through that little small business process.
Yeah. And I can attest to that one because you had to be, and I'm a few years trailing Lisa when I joined, but you had to really be an early like inspector, right? You had to go try and just learn every function to see what system they were using, and it was so difficult. And so then when you transition to a modern system and it's all kind of encompassed within one, or maybe one plus a few point solutions, it's just so much more intuitive, I think is the perfect word to use there, to really do your job, which you shouldn't have to like investigate and research too heavily on where to look to do your job. It should just be pretty standard, like, hey, here's the tool set, learn the tool set, not go find the tool set and then learn it. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah, I can't imagine having to know 28 systems and know for this function go to this system. Like that's mind-blowing. It was tough, but
there were a few Fridays that Tristan and I and his counterpart and my counterpart would spend a Friday investigating in the system to try to solve inventory problems because we knew we were off and they were high dollar parts. We were like, we have got to figure this out. And to Tristan's point, it's pull one report from here, look at this system here, go to this other system here, go follow this transaction history to actually find. It took 4 brains to figure it out.
Yeah. I think something that really stands out to me, like, 28 systems could still be applicable today. It's more of the communication between the systems, which to them in the 80s, probably don't have the best
Mhm.
communications, but now we have that middle layer and all that iPaaS conversation to
Mhm.
allow you to still work in one system, but pull that data and the information from the other. So
Yeah.
interesting.
You had mentioned like these kind of systems in this style of manufacturing. You mentioned supporting the warfighter. So those of us that maybe don't work in A&D or have not worked in A&D, I think the listeners would be interested to hear your perspective on what kind of makes that manufacturing environment unique, right? Because it's very different than other industries such as automotive. Like those two are very different. So what do you see as unique to that industry?
I would say there's a couple. One of the obvious ones, or maybe it's not obvious to the folks that aren't involved, is just the amount of red tape. So every approval that a commercial company needs, we needed 7 times more. We used to joke that we needed permission just to go to the bathroom sometimes because we were so risk averse, right? You don't want to do anything to upset the customer because ultimately they're paying for you. We have to deliver them the capability. So I think that makes it difficult. The other part that I think makes it difficult is it's kind of like it's a Venn diagram twofold, is the lack of common parts sharing. So most programs have my parts, I need these are mine. You may be using the same laser or, optic or lens, but the one program's going to put their own part numbers on, another program's going to put their own part numbers, and they can't share because then they don't match the engineering BOM, which makes it really hard to forecast your floor because it's all so siloed. But you have double the amount of people working in those silos to try to get the same thing done through one commodity shop. I mean, if anyone has worked in most manufacturing, that's whoever screams the loudest gets their part through. And how do you say that, an Apache part is hotter than a JAGM part? And how do you you're going to fight for your program and the center manager doesn't really know which is which because there's a whole nother program office behind you that is also pushing you to get your parts through. So I think the lack of integration makes A&D manufacturing really hard to manufacture and plan.
Yeah.
I think manufacturing could be easier if you could effectively plan.
Let's maybe unpack a couple of those things really fast. So the first thing you had kind of mentioned was the different programs having like parts, different part numbers, 2 people ordering for those programs, right? And so what you're missing out by potentially not having a modern system or not having a modern system with functionality that can aggregate that demand, right? There are solutions, right, that can aggregate that demand. Some people call it commingling to really get your economies of scale is the simple thing behind that. And I do remember like I couldn't just go use a glue or a Loctite out of a flame cabinet across the hall because that's not that program's inventory, right? And that blew my mind because it was the same goop, the same glue, but at the end of the day, that is a challenge. Michael, is there anything you heard there that you wanted to talk about?
So I want to there's 2 pieces, but the first one is what you're talking about. In a modern system, there are really good solutions. How did y'all handle it in a system built in the 80s? Genuinely curious of like high level. Obviously, there's a lot probably there, but like to your point, Tristan, you can't go grab the Loctite. How'd you make sure that Tristan didn't go grab the Loctite? And if he did, what was that impact to the system, right?
It goes back to one of your guys' other podcasts. You were talking about workflows. Is you would email a planner. First of all, you had to look at one of the screens. You had to know what the code was. You look in the screen. You had to know what the program code was to know who the planner was to send them an email to say, hey, can I buy X amount of this part from you? And they would do a voucher and transfer the parts over to you. You have to then you have to promise them a payback so then they can get their parts back. Man. Yep. And that program had to make sure they had enough, their next PO was coming in to support, or the program that bought promised that when their PO came in, they would then a lot of emails back and forth, a lot of permission.
And how did y'all keep track of that bar loan payback? Was that in the system or was that outside?
IADs, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
A little bit of both. Yeah. You could create a demand.
Yeah.
And then you could put a note in there, but Very rarely did people
always
go
very
look in the,
really-
and the note field is like an eighth of a tweet. Like it's like 16 characters, a lot of code, like LP by part 1. Like,
And you know
uh-huh.
what's cool is like I didn't know we were going to go this route, honestly, because some of this stuff was a dark time. Like you're just like, how does this work, right? As a guy that's been there less than a year, and I'm like, we're doing what? Just to borrow that screw, you know, that fast.
That's right there that I can just go grab in my hand right now.
Blew my mind. But nowadays, and from solutions that I've seen, you're able to not only aggregate that demand to, you know, for economies of scale, you can actually put rule sets in place against these different programs that can allow for these like quick and easy transfers. And if anybody hears this and wants to see this, I can totally show them. Because it just, and sometimes programs say no, you know, we're not going to do any transfers, and that's totally fine. You can work in that silo, but as the enterprise, if you can turn on those rule sets to allow for transfers and for it to plan accordingly, you're going to get some efficiencies gained there, which is dollars.
And I think I will one up that as well, is that kind of going back to the mindset, if you can design, have a common parts library and pull from that. So when a design engineer is starting to design a new sensor, they can use the common parts library that's been vetted, has lead times, hotlines, pull from that list, and they can have 80% of their parts list before they even started the true design. And the parts are already hotline in stock, and we can start, you know, doing like a min-max kind of stock load too to help shorten the lead time to get products to the floor or products to the fighter.
I feel like I could keep asking questions, but there's one more thing you said that like brought back almost, how do I say this lightly, a cringe-worthy moment of
indigestion.
Yeah, very bad
trauma.
It was when one steals from another. And I thought back to my time, again, I was much on a very basic level, but sales would say like, hey, this customer, highest priority, you know, steal, right? Go take this part. And the chaos that no one knew happened on the back end was absolutely miserable. It's like, hey, great, thanks. Glad we solved your problem, but you just created 20 more.
Yep.
And
especially when you don't find it until it's too late.
Exactly.
Because the system hasn't caught up with it yet. Yeah.
You know, and so the question I always ask in my mind is like, I want to help you. I really want to be able to help and satisfy your customer's need. How do I let the system be really efficient in managing that so that when I do that, now the system's managing the back end chaos instead of me? So that probably leads into the next question. From your business system, we've talked about some of the challenges. What other challenges did you experience? And any thoughts around how you tried to solve it or did solve it? General challenges or big challenges for you?
I think back to, so I did most of my time, I would say, on like the office side of production planning. I did a little bit of time on the floor, but I did a lot of that back end. And I thought about one of the other podcasts, I think, Michael, you said it. How do we reduce the redundant data entry? And I think a business solution that we struggled with was how do we connect the PLM directly to the MBOM? And for those that don't know, manufacturing bill of material, when a design engineer makes a change to a model or any parts list and it gets approved in change board that moment, it automatically pushes through to the EBOM in your ERP and then the MBOM and the MES. There's a lot of people that have to touch that parts list just to get a screw to change from 1 to 2, right? Like, let alone the amount of approval cycles that it also has to go through. I think that is something that we haven't figured out quite how to pull. We call the digital, right? The digital thread. How do we pull that entire digital thread through so we actually can reduce 80% of that on the inside and it's all integrated within? I think that's a big one. And I'm a BOM planner. My heart and soul is in BOM planning. And I basically just want to get myself out of it because that's all I did was redundantly just take what an engineer gave me and put it as a production planner and then let the MEs put it to an operation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing, we talked 28 systems. PLM is for the engineers. So the engineers are in the world designing, planning, like figuring out how am I going to build this. That's a lot of times broken from the actual ERP that's doing all the ordering. So that's really interesting of, how do we simplify that conversion of information and make sure that both systems have the right information.
Well, and furthermore is kind of the concept of concurrent engineering, right? People talk about it a lot, but when you try to put pen to paper, what does that look like, right? Do you have an operations person from the floor sitting next to an engineer, or is it a shared file? But at that point, when is it too soon to put ops in engineer's lap, but when is it too late to get operations involved too? So we aren't putting a right angle wire through a metal casting.
So
but
for
the engineer has no
guy
idea because they're a design engineer.
With a 5-year-old brain, me, concurrent engineering. Can you explain what concurrent engineering is?
In theory, I think it's a lot harder on paper. It should be the design process happening across all the silos at one time, or within all the swim lanes at one time. Okay. So someone drew it out for me one time, is just think about you're at the dinner table, right? And your engineer is at the head, but you have an ops person sitting next to the engineer. The engineer's serving, let's do family style, right? The design engineer has now served operations something. They're like, well, why did you just put spaghetti in a bowl instead of on a plate or something like that? Yeah. And then they give it back to the engineer and they're like, oh yeah, let me switch that real quick. But what does that actually look like? Is there a bigger seat, a smaller seat? Do they change? Do they shift? Do they, that's kind of where my brain goes with concurrent engineering.
No, and that is actually really helpful. And again, I think every business probably struggles with that because everyone's designing or trying to build something and selling it. And oftentimes that design to build phase, engineers, I've seen a funny meme at some point, but engineers design it, and then the person that goes to build it's like, how am I supposed to fit the screw into that spot right there? Like, it's compact.
It's like that peanut butter and jelly video. It's like, make a PB&J, put the jelly on the bread, and the person takes the jar of jelly and puts it on the bread. You're like, no, that's not what I actually meant.
That's awesome.
Well, and that's, this, I guess for any listeners that have listened to the episode before, obviously this is a point of my specialty, my passion, right? Lisa's is bomb planning. Mine is all around like PLM and engineering and getting that so that you can pass it off to quality and manufacturing engineering, your operations folks, to handle that appropriately. And so this concurrent engineering is really an effort to break the silos, the engineering silos that really don't lead to efficient processing, even down to downstream as far as schedule, right? Because what happens in actuality is when you have these silos with engineering, they design in a bubble and they don't care about schedule. And in a, A&D manufacturing, you have a contract date. You can't miss the contract date. It's just, you just don't do that. And so what happens is engineering eats up all of that, lead time fluff that's in the contract, and then gives operations things late in order to actually execute, go fabricate, build, let alone address problems as far as manufacturability that you just mentioned. So what this does is it hypothetically breaks down those silos and can get everyone moving collaboratively for better schedule, better designs the first time around. And it's possible from a systematic standpoint, but it's going to take one of two things. It takes either a PLM that's embedded into the ERP or your business system, or two, a darn good integration that you're getting up and downstream data flow from operations to engineering and engineering down to operations, so that you can properly manage the life cycle of these designs, of these bill of materials, and those effectivity cut-in dates and all that. So
this is
I'm not the only person that cares about this. So thank you, Lisa, for giving me my opportunity to plug.
Back in when I was in sales in the industrial fluid systems days, I often would get a request from a customer and they'd say, hey, I need this part. We'd figure out the part, great. When do you need it by? Yesterday. So Tristan, thank you for being that engineer that made it yesterday.
I wasn't a design guy, brother.
Well, you know,
I'm not that smart.
I still blame you.
Well, awesome. Lisa, this has been perfect for, our target audience and our listeners. I think they will appreciate your insights and your honesty there. But before you go, I have to ask, do you have any fun facts about you that you'd like to share with us?
It's a little bit of a nerdy fun fact, but it's one of my favorite fun facts. So I grew up competitive dancing on a team or with a company from 3 to 23. My dad owned a audio visual company. He was a production guy. He also owned his own dance competition. So growing up, I always knew I was going to be in production. I just thought it was going to be stage production, not manufacturing operations production. But what it has done is it's let me use my creative brain, the right side of my creative brain to help my left side analytically solve problems. And I think it's kind of what's turned me into who I am today.
That's really cool.
I love it. I did not know that about you.
Yeah, I didn't either, but I've also only known Lisa for about 30 minutes.
Well, Lisa, thanks for coming on to the audience. As always, drink your H2O and really hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you next time.
Go Chippewas!
Fire up chips.